The sky above Earth was once peaceful, but that peace was shattered by an unexpected event. It all began when an alien ship, unlike anything ever seen before, descended from the stars. The world's military had seen strange lights in the sky for weeks, but no one was prepared for what came next. The ship landed just outside a small, quiet town, and within moments, chaos unfolded. People ran through the streets in a panic, some screaming, others frozen in fear. News reports flooded in, showing the bright light of the alien ship's descent. No one knew who the aliens were or what they wanted. The government scrambled to put together a response, but it was too late. The ship's occupants were already on Earth, and they were not here to make friends. The first alien to step out of the ship was different from the others. Unlike the towering, imposing figures that followed, this alien looked fragile. She was small, her skin pale blue, almost glowing in the sunlight, and her eyes, larger than a human's, held an emotion that no one could understand: hope, fear, and curiosity all mixed together. She had long silver hair that moved like it had a mind of its own, flowing and shifting with the wind in her arms. She carried a bundle wrapped in what looked like cloth. She moved cautiously but with purpose, stepping forward as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The other aliens, more imposing and fierce, stood back, as if waiting for her signal. The human soldiers, who had been ordered to protect the town, watched as the small alien approached. They hesitated, unsure of what to do. Were they supposed to attack? Were these peaceful beings? The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, everything was silent. The sound of the wind and the distant crackling of communication radios were the only things that could be heard. Then, without warning, the alien girl spoke in a language no one understood. The words were soft, almost like a whisper. Her voice was like music, but the humans could not make sense of the sound. She seemed to be calling out to someone, perhaps to those who were with her. As she spoke, a few of the other aliens moved forward, their large, strong frames imposing on the small group of soldiers. It was clear that these were no ordinary visitors. They weren't here for peace. They weren't here to ask for help or make allies. But then, the girl's voice broke through the fear and confusion. She looked up at one of the soldiers, her eyes filled with tears, as she whispered in a language that suddenly shifted into something familiar. "Please, human, just give us shelter." The soldiers stared in disbelief, unsure whether they should act on her words. The situation was growing more complicated by the second. The girl's voice was gentle, almost begging. She seemed to be asking for help, but why? Why did she speak like that? "Just give us shelter," she repeated, her voice trembling with something that seemed like desperation. Her eyes searched the faces of the soldiers, each person frozen in place. Was this a trap? Were they being deceived? In the distance, a larger group of aliens began to gather, each of them looking more threatening than the last. They had strange, glowing markings on their skin, their eyes dark and unreadable. The humans could feel their gaze on them, but the girl's plea was clear. She wasn't like the others. She didn't belong with them. The tension was thick in the air. The soldiers were unsure of how to proceed. Should they comply with the girl's request? Or should they defend the town from these invaders? Then, the girl looked down at the bundle in her arms and gently opened it. Inside was a small human-like creature, tiny, fragile, and seemingly unconscious. The soldiers were stunned. The alien girl was carrying a human child. Her voice barely a whisper, she spoke again, this time with more urgency. "Please, just give us shelter. We mean no harm. We are running, hiding from them. They will destroy us all." It became clear that the alien girl wasn't asking for shelter for herself. She was asking for it for everyone. Her people were in danger, and she was terrified. The soldiers exchanged looks. They had never encountered an enemy who spoke with such emotion. Could it be that these aliens were different? Could it be that they were not invaders, but refugees? Desperate for help? As the girl stood there, the other aliens remained still, watching. The soldiers knew they were facing a choice, whether to trust the girl and offer shelter, or risk an all-out war with creatures they knew nothing about. The future of the world could depend on the decision made in the next few minutes. The wind howled through the desolate town, and the sky seemed to darken as the soldiers made their decision. Asterisk. The soldiers stood motionless, their weapons held tight in their hands. The alien girl's plea for shelter echoed in their minds, her desperation clear in her trembling voice. Behind her, the other aliens stood still, their eyes watching the humans with an unsettling calm. The situation had turned from an unthinkable event into something more personal, something that couldn't be ignored. The officer in charge, Captain Adams, stepped forward, trying to steady his breath. He was no stranger to difficult decisions, but this was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. His eyes met the girl's, her large, sorrowful eyes, and he saw something that made his chest tighten. Vulnerability. He glanced at his men, who were just as unsure as he was. "What do we do, Captain?" One of the soldiers whispered, his voice shaky. "Are we really going to trust them?" Adams didn't know the answer. His gut told him there was more to this than met the eye, but the stakes were high. The alien ships, those enormous, intimidating vessels, hovered overhead, and the soldiers didn't know if they were a threat, or if they were part of a much larger, dangerous group. "I'm not sure," Adams replied, his voice low. "But we can't leave them out here to be hunted. Not like this." The girl, sensing their hesitation, stepped forward again. She placed the small bundle of the human child carefully on the ground, her eyes never leaving Adams. "Please," she whispered. "We need shelter, or we won't survive." Her voice held a kind of finality in it. The soldiers could sense that if they didn't act now, things could escalate quickly. "Let's get them inside," Adams finally said, making up his mind. "But we keep our guard up. We don't know what we're dealing with here." He motioned for his men to follow as he moved toward the alien girl. The soldiers slowly lowered their weapons, keeping a cautious distance from the rest of the aliens. There was a strange mix of fear and curiosity in the air, but Adams could see something in the girl's eyes, a flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't enemies. Maybe they were refugees, just like anyone else desperate for a place to hide. The group began moving toward the town's center, where a large, fortified building stood, an old factory that had been repurposed into a shelter. It wasn't much, but it was safe. And in times like these, safety was everything. As they entered the building, the lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the cold, concrete floor. The alien girl walked slowly behind Adams, her eyes scanning their surroundings clearly. Nervous, the other aliens remained outside, standing at the perimeter, waiting for their signal. The soldiers had made it clear that they would not enter until the situation was under control. Inside the factory, Adams gestured for the girl to sit on one of the benches near the wall. "You're safe for now," he said, his voice softer than before. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to reassure her, but he did. She looked so fragile, so young. It was impossible to ignore the concern that grew inside him. The girl nodded gratefully, her eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adams looked at the bundle she had carried in her arms. The small human child. It was odd, almost impossible to believe that an alien could care for a human child. But then again, everything about this situation was strange. "Why is the child here?" Adams asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. He didn't want to sound accusing, but he had to know. Was it a hostage? A tool for manipulation? The girl met his gaze and took a deep breath, as if the answer wasn't easy to share. "This is my sister," she said quietly. "She's one of us. A hybrid. We've been running for so long. We had no choice. The others. She stopped herself, her body shaking. They'll destroy us all if they find her. Adams was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. A hybrid? The idea was hard to grasp. A human alien child. It seemed impossible. But after everything that had already happened, was it really so difficult to believe? Who is trying to destroy you? Adams asked, his mind racing. Who's hunting you? The girl looked away, her expression darkening. The others, she repeated, her voice now full of fear. They are a warrior race. They think we are a failure, a mistake. We are the weak ones. They will not let us live. Adams felt a chill run down his spine. A warrior race? It sounded like something out of a nightmare. We need to get her medical attention, Adams said, motioning to the hybrid child. But we can't do that unless we know more. You have to tell us everything. The alien girl nodded, her body trembling but her resolve hardening. She didn't know who she could trust, but she also knew they had no choice now. They were all in this together. And if they didn't act quickly, they would all be lost. As Adams moved to gather the medkits, the girl whispered one last thing. Please. You don't know what they are capable of. If we don't move soon, they will come. They will burn everything to the ground. The alien girl looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. You have to leave me, she whispered. I'll distract them. You have to run. Take her and go. No, Adams hissed, shaking his head. We leave together, or we don't leave at all. We're in this together. The girl's eyes filled with tears. I can't let them hurt you. You've shown kindness. You've given us a chance. You have to survive. You have to protect the child. Adam's breath caught in his throat. He knew that the girl was right. They had to move fast. There was no time left. He looked at her one last time. We'll get you out of here, I promise. Just hold on. With a final glance at the girl, Adam stood, motioning to his soldiers, who were hiding in the shadows. They were going to make a stand. The soldiers would be distracted by their movement. That would be their chance. The alien girl closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She knew what had to be done. As Adams moved toward the exit, she whispered one last plea. Please, don't let them win. Adams nodded, even though she couldn't see it. We won't, he said, his voice firm with determination. They dashed toward the exit, but the sound of soldiers following quickly behind them was deafening. There was no more time to think. Only action. Adams could feel the world closing in around them. The chase was on, and the real battle was just beginning. Adams. Heart hammered in his chest as he and the alien girl sprinted toward the open door. The soldiers were closing in, their footsteps echoing through the building with growing intensity. Each step felt like it could be their last, but there was no turning back now. They had to keep moving. As they reached the door, Adams motioned for his soldiers to fan out, positioning themselves in the shadows, ready for whatever came next. The alien girl's wide, terrified eyes met his, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. This was it. There was no more running. They would either make it out alive, or they would fight to the end. Adams turned and sprinted into the open alley, with the girl close behind him. The night was cold, and the silence between them felt deafening. He could hear the muffled sounds of the soldiers moving, their whispers and commands lost in the night air. It wouldn't be long before they were upon them, but there was still a chance to get to the tunnel system. You need to trust me, Adams said, his voice steady but full of urgency. We'll make it. Just stay close. The alien girl nodded, her eyes wide, but she didn't respond. She had no choice but to follow. The child in her arms was still unconscious, her small body trembling from the cold. They reached the edge of the alley, where a rusted old iron door led to the underground tunnel. It had been abandoned for years, but it was still intact. The Von Lee entrance was hidden in the shadows, offering a slim hope of escape. Adam slammed his fist against the metal door. It creaked open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit stairway leading downward into the darkness. "Go! Go now!" Adam shouted to his soldiers, his voice sharp. He could hear the enemy soldiers now closer, much closer. They were closing the distance. And fast. But just as the last soldier stepped inside the tunnel, a shout from behind froze them all in place. "Stop them!" The commanding voice shouted, echoing through the alley. It was the voice of the soldier who had betrayed them, the one who had given the order to exterminate the aliens. Adam spun around just in time to see the group of soldiers appear in the mouth of the alley, their weapons aimed directly at them. There was no turning back now. "Get down!" Adams yelled as he pulled the alien girl and the child behind him, using his body as a shield. The sound of gunfire split the air, and Adams felt the rush of adrenaline surge through him. He dove for cover behind a pile of rubble, his soldiers immediately returning fire. The alley lit up with flashing lights, the deafening crack of gunshots filling the air. But it was clear, they were outnumbered. They were trapped. The alien girl, trembling, held the child tightly to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror as she crouched down beside Adams. "They're here. They won't stop until we're all dead," she whispered. "I can feel them getting closer. We need to fight back now." Adams clenched his fists, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here, not for long. The soldiers were advancing, steadily, pushing them back. He needed a plan, but time was running out. One of his soldiers, Sergeant Cole, moved forward cautiously, his weapon aimed at the advancing enemies. "Captain, we can't hold them off much longer. We need to retreat into the tunnel. Now." But as Cole spoke, a second wave of soldiers appeared from the other side of the alley. They had been flanked. The situation had turned from bad to worse. Damn it! Adams cursed under his breath. He had to make a choice. They couldn't fight them all off. The only way out was down into the tunnels. "Cover us!" Adams shouted to his soldiers. "Get the girl and the child into the tunnels. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Go now." The alien girl's eyes widened in fear, but she didn't argue. She knew what had to be done. She grabbed the child and scrambled toward the entrance to the tunnel. With Adams and his soldiers providing cover, the soldiers who had once been part of the betrayal were closing in quickly, their guns trained on Adams. But before they could take another step forward, Adams stepped out from behind the cover and fired off several quick shots. His aim was precise, each bullet knocking one of the soldiers to the ground. "Get down!" he shouted to the girl, who was halfway into the tunnel. She turned back, her eyes locked onto him for a brief moment, but she didn't hesitate. She disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, her only goal to keep the child safe. Adams didn't wait for the girl to be out of sight. As the remaining soldiers rushed toward him, he dropped to the ground, rolling into a new position behind a Kodu barrel. The gunfire continued to fill the air, the sounds of war drowning out all else. His soldiers fought valiantly, but they were slowly being pushed back. "We need to retreat now," Sergeant Cole shouted. "We can't win this fight. There are too many of them." Adams knew the truth of it. They couldn't keep this up. He was buying time, but for what? To delay the inevitable? Another burst of gunfire pierced the air, and Adams felt a searing pain in his side. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let the pain slow him down. He fired back at the soldiers, his focus unwavering. But he could feel his strength waning. Every second was a battle. Every breath was harder to take. The enemy soldiers were nearly upon him, their weapons raised. Adams' vision blurred for a moment, but he pushed through it, determined to make sure the alien girl and the child got to safety. "I'm sorry," he whispered under his breath. He knew the end was near. But he had done what he could. He had kept his promise. Just as the enemy closed in, ready to strike the final blow, A loud explosion ripped through the air, throwing everyone off balance. The building around them shook, debris raining down in all directions. That it wasn't over yet. There was one last chance. The deafening roar of the explosion still rang in Adam's ears as the world around him seemed to crumble into chaos. The force of the blast threw him to the ground, his body slamming against the cold, unforgiving pavement. Pain shot through his side where he had been shot, but his mind was clear. The fire and smoke that filled the air only served to fuel his resolve. He could still hear the distant sounds of gunfire, the frantic shouts of the soldiers, but for a brief moment, all he could focus on was getting to the alien girl and the child. Through the haze of dust and debris, Adams pulled himself to his feet, grimacing with every movement. His soldiers, though battered, continued to fire back at the approaching enemy, their determination unbroken. But Adams knew that this was a fight they couldn't win, not here, not now. He staggered toward the entrance of the tunnel, each step a battle against the pain in his side. The smoke was thick, swirling around him like a suffocating fog. The explosion had torn a hole in the alleyway, creating a temporary barrier between the soldiers and the tunnel entrance. It was their only chance to escape. The alien girl, with the hybrid child still in her arms, was at the entrance, her face a mixture of fear and determination. She glanced up as Adams approached, her eyes widening in shock. "You're hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have stayed." Adams shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the pain. "Had to make sure you got out," he muttered. "Can't let you face it alone." The girl looked down at the child in her arms, her expression softening. The hybrid child's features were peaceful now, as if she felt safe for the first time in what felt like forever. It was a small moment of peace amidst the chaos, a reminder of the fragile hope that remained. "They're not far behind," the poor girl whispered. "We have to go now. We have no time left." Adams nodded, though his body screamed for rest. He couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Not when there was still a chance for them to survive. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind him, soldiers, but not his own. They were closing in again. With a sharp grunt of effort, Adams motioned for the girl to go first. "Go. I'll cover you." She hesitated, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something almost unspoken between them. She wasn't sure how to repay him for all he had done, for all they had been through, but there was no time for words. There was only survival. The girl ducked into the tunnel, the child nestled close to her chest, and Adams followed closely behind. They moved quickly, the sound of the enemy soldiers still echoing in the distance, but they were hidden now deep within the dark, narrow passages of the tunnel system. The tunnel was cold and damp, the walls lined with moss and dirt. The air was stale, but it was a refuge, a place where they could regroup, where the danger could momentarily be kept at bay. But Adams knew they wouldn't be safe for long. They had to keep moving, find a way out of the city, get to the hills as he had promised. The alien girl's people needed to be hidden, far away from the soldiers who sought their destruction. As they walked deeper into the tunnel, the alien girl finally spoke, her voice low, almost inaudible. "Why did you help us? After everything that's happened, I don't understand." Adams looked at her, his expression grim. "It's simple. I don't believe in killing the innocent. You're not the enemy. They are. And if there's one thing I know, it's that there's always hope, even in the darkest places." She glanced at him, her eyes full of something that could almost be called trust. "Hope," she repeated softly. "I never thought I'd hear that word again." They continued through the winding tunnels, but their progress slowed. The girl was exhausted, and Adam's wounds were starting to take their toll. He could feel the blood soaking through his shirt, his strength waning. But there was no time to stop. There was no time to rest. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking, they reached the end of the tunnel. The faint light of dawn was beginning to filter through a small crack in the tunnel's ceiling. They were almost there. As Adams emerged from the tunnel into the open air, he looked around. They had made it out of the city. But the battle was far from over. The soldiers would follow, but they wouldn't give up easily. The girl stopped beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. The hills ahead were a long way off, but they were their only hope. She turned to face him, her voice steady despite the fear. "Thank you, Captain. I don't know what would have happened without you. You gave us a chance." Adams, exhausted but resolute, nodded. "It's not over. We've got a long way to go." The girl gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. She understood. They both understood that they had only just begun. They had fought for survival, but the real battle was still ahead of them, the fight for peace, for a future where their kind could coexist. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Adams knew that their journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that they might make it, that they might survive, and that somehow, they might just change the future. And with that, they began to walk toward the hills, toward whatever awaited them in the unknown. Together,